Test, test. Yes. Okay. Oh, wow. What a great crowd. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. My name is Charmaine Williams, and I am professor and dean at the Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work, where I also hold the Sandra Rotman Chair in Social Work. It is my pleasure to welcome you here this evening to our third annual Janis Rotman Distinguished Lecture on Mental Wellness. I'm going to start us off with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on this land. As a School of Social Work located on Treaty 13 territory, it is important that we acknowledge our responsibility to learn about the histories of Indigenous peoples, to teach our students about the role social work has played in contributing to harms and intergenerational trauma, and to work together to confront the racism and oppression that persists in our field and in our communities. We are committed to working collectively for and with Indigenous communities toward reconciliation. One of the ways we strive to meet this commitment is by strengthening the capacity of social work to provide culturally relevant care and support. While this is a core component of all of our fields of study, I'd like to highlight today FIFSW's field of study in Indigenous trauma and resiliency, which marks its 10th anniversary this year. 2 weeks ago, we celebrated the convocation of many of our recent graduates from this program, and I encourage you to visit our website to learn about some of the students and alumni in this field of study who are now making a huge difference in their communities. I would also call attention to another area of education where we strengthen social work's capacity to promote well-being, which is in our fields of study that is for children and their families. This field prepares students to work with children and families across individual, community, and policy levels using a trauma-informed and family-focused approach. Grounded in social, ecological, and developmental perspectives, it emphasizes the importance of repairing the harms of past and ongoing practices and fostering resilience through culturally responsive, evidence-informed care. Graduates and alumni of this field of study are making a difference in systems and services all around us. And tonight's speaker is one of the colleagues at the Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work who has been instrumental in creating this very important curriculum. This evening's lecture is part of the Janis Rotman Distinguished Lecture Series on Mental Wellness, which every year presents a keynote address by a leading researcher, practitioner, or educator. Lecture topics include innovations in culturally attuned mental health services, social work's role in addressing widening mental health disparities, the impact of community-based care, and other contemporary concerns at the intersection of social work and mental health. I would like to extend our gratitude to Janis Rotman for her lead gift in support of the faculty's Talk It Out counseling clinic, which inspired the launch of this series. A generous philanthropist, Janis has been a champion of numerous programs and institutions spanning health, mental wellness, and culture, with an emphasis on Canada's youth and helping children in need. In recognition of her work, Janis was recognized with an appointment to the Order of Ontario in 2019. Through her efforts to elevate programs of vital importance to the health and well-being of individuals, families, and society, Janis has sparked new collaborations, illuminated the needs and aspirations of diverse communities, and served as a catalyst for systemic change. Janis asked that I share a few words of welcome and gratitude on her behalf this evening. I thank everyone who is here tonight for joining us to learn more about this important topic. Bringing people together to learn, reflect, and connect around groundbreaking research and initiatives that promote mental wellness elevates this crucial work. It can also spark new innovations, strengthen practices, and deepen our understanding of key issues that affect us all. I hope that tonight's discussion will, in some way, inspire all of us to do what we can to promote better outcomes for children, families, and communities affected by trauma. We are thrilled that you have joined us here this evening, whether in person or online, for what is sure to be a compelling and illuminating lecture. We hope that you will also be able to join us for future lectures in the years to come. So, on behalf of Janis Rotman, welcome and thank you for being here. And let's just take a moment to show some appreciation for Janis while we're at it. Thank you. This evening's lecture by Professor Ramona Alagia will examine how trauma can shape the lives of children and families. It will explore the far-reaching effects of novel social and environmental challenges, including their impact on health and mental health, and will identify resilience-building strategies to promote recovery and strengthen well-being at the individual, familial, and community levels. Our featured speaker, Professor Ramona Alagia, is a leading expert in this field. In addition to holding the Margaret and Wallace McCain Family Chair in Child and Family at the Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work, Ramona is the director of the Thrive Research Incubation Laboratory for Child and Youth Trauma at the University of Toronto. This new collaborative hub brings together researchers, practitioners, students, and community partners to engage in research that will inform policy and establish best practices in trauma-informed care. Dr. Alagia's full body of research centers trauma and resilience across the life course with a focus on gender-based violence, child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, and structural barriers that impede recovery. A recent study published in the journal Research on Social Work Practice identified Dr. Alagia as one of the 100 most impactful global contributors to social work scholarship. Let's just meditate on that, then. We are very proud of that. After Professor Alagia's talk, we will invite Professor Lin Fang, director of the faculty's Talk It Out Counseling Clinic, to moderate a Q&A session, during which we will invite questions from the audience both in person and online. For those of you who are joining us virtually, please use the Q&A button to submit your questions online. I, for one, am looking forward to this talk and the conversation that will follow, so please don't be shy with your questions. And with that, I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Ramona Alagia to the podium.
Wow, I just have to say that it's such an honor to be invited to speak here tonight. Thank you very much, Dean Williams, for that introduction. I hope I live up to it. And I am just thrilled to be able to be sharing my work, my thoughts with you, and hopefully a rich discussion at the end. And what I'm really here to talk about is mental well-being as it relates to children. I've titled my talk a little dramatically, but I don't think really I have embellished that much to say that my talk is about rescue and recovery, building resilience with children, families, and communities. So there is the good news, what we can do about this, but we also have to acknowledge that we have a generation at risk. This generation really has been through something that no other young generation has been through, a pandemic. That's also affected everybody. And so we really need to look at this kind of collective trauma and how we can respond to help with the recovery of our future generation. You know, one of the first things we should be asking ourselves is like, what does good mental health and well-being look like in children? And while this seems like a sort of simple thing to wrap our heads around, it's actually complex. But we have psychosocial indicators to let us know, what sort of normative, positive development happens for mental health, for good mental health, and that's just simply the ability for children to play, to learn, to develop relationships, to have secure attachments, to be able to regulate strong emotions, and to be able to express those feelings, to engage with family, peers, school, and community, and to have curiosity, to explore, to have feelings of self efficacy and strong self esteem. We also know now that there's a very critical mind body connection. So we look at physical indicators as well. Uh, Good sleeping and eating patterns is important, and meeting developmental, cognitive, physical, emotional, social, and language milestones. We can look at this through an absence lens. So, good mental health is the absence of depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive behaviors, disordered eating, disorders of conduct. But good mental health and well being does not happen in a vacuum. I want to talk a little bit about the ecosystem of the child. We have the child as sort of the center of their universe. But within that, they are embedded in these crucial systems around them. We have families with certain characteristics and dynamics. They go to school. When we think about the percentage of time they spend away from home, school is another really crucial aspect of their lives. The neighborhoods they live in, the communities they participate in, and cultural influences. So I'm really wanting to talk about the environmental conditions and all of these systems, societal attitudes that can support and nurture positive outcomes, that it is not the child alone that shoulders the issues that prevent them from having good mental health or allow them to have good mental health. So I want to talk a little bit about adversity, stress, toxic stress, and trauma. They're all a little bit different, but important to recognize. So when it comes to adversity, I don't think there's anybody here in this room or in the virtual audience that has not experienced or will not experience some adversity in their lives. It's part of the life cycle milestones. We will have beloved parents who pass. We may have systemically induced hardships if a child is having a learning issue, a learning disability, and doesn't get the proper supports or systems in place. And then acute events that happen, those things like accidents or other unforeseen adversities. So we can't avoid adversity. Although I will talk about parents in the phase in which, we wanted to really protect our kids from any kind of harms, and that doesn't necessarily do them good in terms of preparing them for real life. Stress is a part of everyday life. We have stressors that we confront every day, just as children do, whether it's, preparing for a test for school, whether it's, worrying about a performance that they're preparing for. And this is normative. But then we have toxic stress. And that's where the stress is chronic and sets kids up for a fight, flight, or freeze response, in which they're in a constant state of hypervigilance. These are children who may be living at home where there's domestic violence. They may be victims of child abuse. And this is a different kind of stress that we need to recognize, and on an ongoing basis, and without any kind of intervention or remediation from this, we then see that we have possible trauma. This is just a little diagram to show that we've also started to notice that with chronic stress, not only is mental health affected, but we also have diseases that are, based in inflammation, immune dysregulation, and what we call gut, sort of gut diseases that we're starting to become more aware of. Which actually, we should think about this. When a child says to a parent, I can't go to school, I have a tummy ache, or I have a headache. So many times we said, oh, here they are trying to get out of school. But we don't ask, why are they wanting to get out of school? How do we know that that isn't about a bully that they have to confront every day at school, or some other hardship that is originating from school? So we're starting to make these connections. But when trauma enters the picture, then we're looking at something much more also serious. There are different kinds of trauma. It can be acute. So it could be a one-time incident, a natural disaster, like I said, an accident, or this kind of chronic situation that kids may be living in, or this collective trauma that we've all been through with the pandemic. Now, it doesn't mean that we're all traumatized forever and we're going to be deeply affected. Some people come through the other side, and we're going to talk about that in terms of resilience. But we do have to know that it's affected. It's been a life-altering experience in our lives. Um, we also have intergenerational trauma. I think, Dean Williams covered half my talk, actually. But, we have intergenerational trauma from the detrimental impacts of colonization with indigenous families or Holocaust survivors. There are many ways that this can be transmitted intergenerationally from things that have happened in the past, and we want to try to interrupt that, disrupt that, and put folks on a healthy path of well-being. But what happens with trauma is that there's a heightened sense of threat to one's physical and or mental well-being that doesn't go away, that they've been in a situation where this feeling has not gone away, and it causes them to change their worldview. We see this in war veterans. We just had Remembrance Day, where there's a feeling of being different, of not being understood, that the world is not to be trusted. And there may be feelings that come through this in terms of numbing those terrible feelings, or doing the opposite and becoming very hypersensitive and hypervigilant to one's surroundings and hypervigilant to threats in the environment. And again, because of the mind-body connection, we also see this in sleep and eating disruptions. Flashbacks are sometimes part of that as well, night terrors, nightmares. And so we know that this has a connection to physical symptoms as well. So now I'm going to talk. And what I often say is, when we talk about trauma or these kinds of adversities, we really, the other half of the equation is resilience. And we need to look at that other half and understand what that is. And I know that this can bring all sorts of conversations about where resilience is sometimes a contested term. It is sometimes a term that people think, oh, this is just putting a happy face on some, and then kind of dismissing it and pushing it away so we don't have to deal with it. Oh, it wasn't that bad. They're resilient. They'll get over it. Resilience needs to be fostered. It needs to be built. And so in my research, and I've been studying resilience for probably about the last 10, 12 years in various studies, starting with an original study I'll talk about, we went to define resilience in this broadest way possible. In psychology, which is what they do, they focus on the individual, and they really look at sort of the personal traits that one has to say whether somebody's going to be resilient or not. In social work, we want to look at the social ecology of the person and see it that it's not, we want to get away from this neoliberal way of thinking that people either pull up their bootstraps and get moving on, or they don't, and it's their responsibility and their fault if they don't move on. Whereas in this lens of resilience, navigating through adversity, we are really defining it as not only those personal qualities, but also the relationships, the communities, and the cultural factors that contribute to the building of resilience. One doesn't do this on their own. As I said, it takes a village. It requires the support of healthy adaptation, recovery, and successful outcomes over the life course. And it can and needs to be fostered. It's just not going to happen magically. So resilience is a combination of individuals, communities, policy, and decision makers supporting children through adversity and trauma as well. So we, from my research, like to think about resilience as a process, an opportunity, not something children have or don't have, and that's sort of the end of the sentence. They're either born with it or they're not, but in fact, resilience needs to be nurtured. This is a project I was referring to, the project called Make Resilience Matter, where we did an ongoing study of children exposed to violence through which resilience factors were identified in these four important domains. Personally, yes, we have our personal attributes. And looking at the literature and after interviewing about almost 40 young adults who'd gone through some adversity, mostly through being exposed to violence in their lives, we found that positive attitude, persistence, optimism, hope, intelligence, sense of humor, flexibility, and skills and talents were something that were resilience factors. Relationally, secure attachments, just one person, one significant person in their life is great if it's a primary caregiver, but it can be extended family, a positive peer group, a mentor, a teacher, a coach, community and culture, that kids for resilience need to live in safe neighborhoods. That's not really happening these days. Secure housing, got a housing crisis. Faith beliefs, doesn't necessarily mean organized religion, but some sort of belief in a higher power to get people through. Positive cultural values. And a socio-political environment that supports policies that support child and family development. Universal child care is one example. I'll talk more about that. The recently implemented program of across the country of $10 a day daycare. It's $19 in Ontario. We're trying to bring that down. Equitable housing, childcare benefits, nurse in-home visiting, pre and postnatal, which we've seen stripped away except for at-risk families, and a focus on infant mental health. Let me just pull some of this together for you. When we look at the personal and we look at intelligence, we can say, yeah, you're born with that. Ah, but you're born with that good brain if you've had good prenatal care and the information that a mother needs to ensure the healthy growth of a fetus in utero, and then postnatally having those supports of stimulation, of supportive family for breaks, of all those things that lead to the optimal kind of intelligence that people. So it's not just, oh, you're intelligent or you're not, but it can be something that's developed. Or let's say, and that's why sociopolitically, it's so important to have in-home visiting from nurses to detect whether there are issues, to support, a new parent, and also a focus on infant mental health. I'll mention that a bit more later. If you want to look at our website where we have examples of how to, the case examples, literature, uh, resources, visit makeresiliencematter.ca. Now, going back to how do we set the stage for building resilience? We have to have trauma-informed environments. When I look at this list, these are sort of the commonly held principles of how we create trauma-informed environments: safety, trust, choice and control, empowerment, collaboration, strengths-based approaches. 'Cause, we're so, it's so easy to go into the deficit, the problem pieces, when we have to look at the strengths and then therefore seeking solutions. And then an intersectional and equity lens. What I find really heartening about these principles is they're so aligned with social work, practice, values, and ethics. We're just perfectly positioned in social work to be able to develop these and to implement these environments, and not just in our therapy offices or clinics, but in all systems that are dealing with kids. One of the things that we found through the adverse childhood events study, which is about a longitudinal study done since the early 1960s, one of the most highly regarded, highly reputed studies, that the prevalence of trauma in people is far greater than we ever thought, but it may never be disclosed, it may never be revealed, and some people don't even know. So there's nothing to disclose. However, they're experiencing the effects of that trauma. So it's just good practice to approach all of our work and all of our systems from a trauma-informed lens. Okay, I'm setting the background for this, but we're going to talk about a cross-country checkup on our kids. Where are our kids today in Canada? I'm going to just speak to Canada. We have a group that's called Canada Raising Children. Um, and it is a nonprofit, nonpartisan group that brings out an annual report on the state of our children. They've been doing this since 2018. And this year's recommendations, the broad recommendations, are that Canada's children face interconnected challenges that require urgent, systemic, and equity-driven solutions, and collaboration across all sectors of society is essential to ensure that children have an opportunity to thrive. This is where I borrowed that quote, "A generation at risk." The report was put out in August, and findings aren't great. We have child poverty that's increased to 13.4% since 2017, affecting almost 1.5 million children in Canada. About 1 in 5 young people aged 12 to 17 report symptoms consistent with mental disorder, anxiety, depression, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder being especially common. 1 in 3 Canadians has experienced some form of childhood maltreatment before their 15th birthday. And that's also supported by the Canadian Medical Association survey that's often cited. An overwhelming majority of young Canadians, 71% of youth between the ages of 12 and 17, reported experiencing some form of bullying in the past 12 months. And guess where that is often happening? Online. It used to be school. It's now school and online. We also have many children reporting experiencing climate anxiety, distress about their future, and post-traumatic stress after natural disasters. The report also found that 54% of foster children under the age of 15 were Indigenous, despite Indigenous children comprising only 8% of the overall child population. We have an overrepresentation of Black children in the child welfare system as well. And then we have the new age stressors for youth. How many here saw adolescence? The program, yeah. I know it's a scary thing to think about watching, but I think it's worth watching. I've watched it about 4 times now, and I use it in classes and I use it in demonstrations of sort of the challenges that young people are having around social media. And I'm not saying social media is bad, but there are some parts that are not good. And we really need to acknowledge those and see what's happening. We've got teens are sexting. Um, and now what? Well, we're starting to see sextortion, where adolescent boys in particular are affected and are dying by suicide. I want to talk a little bit about this. It's not safe. Something happened and I can't quite figure it out, but it converged around like 2000, 2001 with the digital era. And we had an explosion, an information explosion at that time from the sort of ways that we could generate and push knowledge and information out. And it really scared parents. Scared parents to the point, and I remember my girls at that time were growing up, that um, walking to school suddenly became a precarious event. How many people have heard of helicopter parenting? Where there's a lot of overprotection, a lot of parents who felt that the world is bad out there, and so we went into sort of kind of hyper mode of this protectiveness. And so we were feeling like a lot of parents are feeling it's better the kids stay at home. And what were they doing? Hmm. Gaming, online. Suddenly they have this whole other world the parents have no idea about and what's happening there and what's happening online. So come on in from that unsafe world out there and let's plunk you here and you've got your devices now and you're in a whole other world and we don't know anything about this. Most adults don't. So that we're starting to see issues around, oops, let me go back a bit, um, uh, violent extremism, where youth are being recruited, often through algorithms, gaming. I can't go into all the details, it's very complex, where a real kind of alt-right world exists for them. And if they're feeling they're not belonging in the real world, they find a belonging there. And the risks increase for harm. Just let me show you a little something here. I've seen these around, these little frog emojis and stuff like that. Do you know what that's code for? It's code for one youth to another youth saying, I am in the alt-right world. I am, this is it's Pepe the frog. And I used to see it on Instagram on some of my friends, even, not really close friends, but, when you start to see things and I go, what is that little frog? Well, it's like a signal. We are part of this group and it can represent violent extremism. And then the research that's come out on Instagram, Facebook, all the sort of metaverse social media, where Instagram is referred to as Thinstagram, where the algorithm fuels disordered eating and an epidemic. There's some great books out about this. People have used to work for Zuckerberg and Facebook and Instagram and really revealing the truths of what they were made to do or kind of fell into that push this kind of ideology that really affects youth. Okay, we've done the theory. You should know something a little bit about child development. I have no doubt some theory on trauma-informed practice and some theory on resilience. We're going to put this all together and really look at an example of how we can help this recovery through a trauma and resilience-informed lens. So I've mentioned this a few times now. We've just gone through the stress of a global pandemic. Schools were closed down. Children and their families were isolated at home, so you can imagine if home was not a safe place, what that meant for some children and youth. Um, the online world becomes a big part of family life. Kids are being schooled online, parents are working online, and then kids have this other whole world online and more access to it. What we saw at the same time too was a real increase in sex trafficking of minors, uh, a real surge during this period of time because that is one way that luring, grooming happens online. And then once, we've experienced this collective trauma, we're out of the pandemic, and children and youth go back to school in person, and we're hearing stories about students being under-socialized, that teachers are leaving the field. Can you believe this? I remember at a time where the applications for teachers college were just like skyrocketing through the roof. Now they can't find enough teachers to work in our schools because the kids are too unruly. It's unsafe. If it's unsafe and unruly for the teachers, can you imagine what it's like for the kids? We see youth crime going up. How many times have you read in the newspaper, online, or wherever you read your news, and you hear of a crime being committed and suspects being arrested or charged, and you don't find out their names because they're minors, they're protected by the Youth Offender Act. Um, I'm hearing it constantly, whether it's these jewelry robberies where they're ramming trucks through, mall doors and they recruit, it's organized crime ringleaders recruit young people to do these crimes. And then they end up, so it's just really a really concerning byproduct again of the after effects of this pandemic. So when I talk about environments needing to be trauma informed and resilience building, I want to use the example of schools, and I've just pointed out the issues that we're facing at school, and the various aspects of what's occurring that schools are becoming unsafe places. So we're talking about trauma informed. We're talking about needing to have safety. Isn't that like Maslow's sort of, hierarchy of needs, safety, whether it's, through the schools, but also through food security, neighborhoods, housing. A lot of this is being eroded, and we're really experiencing some critical issues around this. So, what can we do? And here are some examples that I've been able to identify that we can start to do some building. But before we go on to that, I'm sorry, I do want to talk about some of the actions that have been taken that are really concerning. We're seeing law enforcement models dominating in schools, police being brought in, security guards. Whatever happened to getting more social workers? How about all the guidance counselors that we've lost over the years? And this is pre-pandemic. This erosion is now accumulating into these, lack of resources at a time when we've had a crisis that we need to respond to. And the response has been, let's bring in police, let's bring in security guards. How safe are kids at school when we see the rise of bullying? You really should, if you ever have a chance, take a look at the Kids Help Phone reports that come out annually about the rise in these kinds of issues that kids are contacting Kids Help Phone. During the pandemic, the highest rate of increase in calls was for eating disorders, body image problems. Okay, we go back, the online world, Instagram, because it's coming out, and kids are asking for services. So child abuse, they're reporting more physical abuse, probably because they're at home, parents are losing it. There is more of that kind of disciplinary parenting going on. Let's talk a little bit about the cell phone ban controversy. When teachers really and parents want to get the cell phones out of schools, there's been pushback, now we have these policies, but it makes sense that if there's another world that these kids are living in, when they're at school, they should be putting that world aside. I know, oh, what if I have to, contact my parents for an emergency? What if I have to look up something online for an assignment? We all survived before we had cell phones in schools, and we did okay. So, even that's pushback, and having that controversy takes away from healthy development and adaptation. Look at the extracurricular programs that have been severely cut. You either go on a waiting list or you pay for it. If you don't have the money, you're on a waiting list. You may never get in with your kids and what do we see in some of the resilience factors? Nurturing skills and talents. That was highly identified in my research as what saved some kids when they're growing up in an abusive household. I could at least get out to the gym. I could, get out to I had my drama classes. I could throw myself into art. I could, do all these things that right now we don't really have the resources. We're not providing them in school. And in fact, teachers are saying they don't want to stay in school any longer than they have to. Um, we've seen power taken away from schools. Trustees have been reduced. The sort of reorganization of the school boards and the power is taken away and given over to the province. Trustees are advocates for students and families when there are problems. Those roles don't exist anymore. Where do people go? Or there's so few of them left, their caseloads are so high, it's difficult to give a quality response. So what are some of the exemplars of resilience promoting programs? There's a party going on somewhere. um, okay, uh, so we're seeing a rise in bullying. We're seeing a rise in dating violence. We're seeing a lot of confusion and debates around what constitutes consent, sexual consent, other forms of consent. So I work with a program through the Thrive Lab, Boost Child and Youth Advocacy Center, where they have developed a gender-based violence prevention program that's more than sex ed. So sometimes these get morphed into sex ed and healthy relationships, but it really just skims the surface. This program is really designed to deal with and based on surveys of kids on what issues are affecting them when it comes to healthy relationships, when it comes to dating, when it comes to racism that they experience, other forms of bullying that they experience. And they deliver a 12 module program to grade 7s and 8s where they talk, we call it the real pep talk, like the real deal, not just the birds and the bees, but things like consent. And we get a lot of pushback because these are like 12, 13-year-olds, sometimes 14-year-olds. And parents are saying, aren't they too young to know about this stuff? No, this is exactly when they're forming their opinions, their thoughts about what it means to be in relationships, what it means to be in interactions. We're not going to stop that. They're thinking about it, probably 24/7. And we think that if we talk about what is consent and how do you know when you have consent, that somehow we are going to push them to have sex. um, and they're we've done some surveys. We went into a few high schools, middle schools before the pandemic, and we were surprised at how much they knew, what 12-year-olds could tell us about what they need to know and what they didn't know. So it's programs like this, but this is, an agency that's found some government funding, that has convinced a few schools, not also, this is voluntary, to implement this program. It's not universal, and it should be, or programs like this. Let's look at some international examples. Here's an example of empathy fostering classes that Denmark's been doing for at least the last 15 years. Part of the issue is this sort of loss of empathy that we are observing. That's what happens with bullying. That's what happens with date rape. That's what happens when harms occur. And so it's a great program. Oh, it's actually since 1993 that Denmark has that every child is required to take from 6 to 16. So it gets like, more highly evolved. It gets, more complex with some of the, to really help kids put themselves in another person's shoes to understand what it would feel like if they were experiencing something that was being done to them and they would think twice about it. So we, and the results are there. Denmark has the world's lowest bullying rates and world's highest kindness scores. I'd like to see that scale. Um, so we should be thinking more about these kinds of programs. These are resilience building programs that help our kids in a very difficult situation now, but for the future of our generation. So that's sort of like at the personal level that, we have resilience promoting programs, personal, relational. But we also need to have resilience promoting policies. So I'm going back to the social ecological model of it's not just on the individual, it's all these concentric circles that need to be working and operating at the same time for the same goal. And so during the pandemic, um, there were times when one parent needed to stay home and kids weren't going to school. Um, Schools were closed, not because they were refusing to go to school. And because we are still in and this is some feminist theory coming through on my part, we're still in a society where women in Canada still make 78 cents to a man's dollar in the workplace. That I'll show you the studies, they're time studies, they're cost studies. So if one parent cannot go to work and has to give up their work, it's not going to be the lower paying parent, and it's almost always going to be the mom. And moms also have this nurturing thing. I'm going to, if it costs my job, so what? I'm going to stay at home. That's where the kids need to be safe. So I don't know if it was fortuitous, if it was coincidental, although some people believe there's no such thing as coincidence or accidents, but it just happened at the time we had a government who, and advocates, Margaret McCain being one of them, who really pushed for what we now have is universal childcare in Ontario. So both parents can go out to work. And it's not just about, oh, we're going to, put them in daycare, childcare, and so we can go to work. It's also about providing, and I'm going to go back to infant mental health and all those important developmental years from birth to 3 or 4, just before going to regular school, where having a stimulating, enriching environment with daycare providers who are trained professionally is where kids can really benefit. So it's a win-win situation. Parents go out, kids get what they need. And just think if some of those kids are coming from unsafe homes, it might be just that, 8-hour break in their day that they're in another community, another setting where they don't experience the potential violence that is happening at home. Advocacy. We have really lost our way in terms of advocacy. And I think this is a call to social work as well. that this is one of the areas that we've really sort of neglected. We used to be advocates, and I think we really need to return to it. But from the report that I quoted from the beginning, they um, they talk about calls to action and the recommendations for certain calls to action. And youth advocacy is top amongst that. They're calling to establish a national strategy for children and youth, including a commissioner for children and youth. We don't have one. We did. We did kind of. But the Conservative government closed the Ontario Children's Advocates Office in 2019. Now, there's an ombudsperson. There's an office of the ombudsperson. But they deal with all cases across the lifespan. Whereas children from the UN Rights of the Children really say that children should be treated as a unique population, should not be grouped in with other developmental stages, and especially if they are in crisis and need an advocate, they need an office to go through. So this is really reestablishing something that we used to have in Ontario, we no longer have, and is an important piece of a support, an advocacy support. It is especially for vulnerable children, where often children who are leaving care of the Children's Aid and are really cast adrift have used the previous advocate's office to extend their benefits, to increase the age range of which they can get health care, medical care, educational support. They did that. Now it's come down. So, we know that youth, when they have a voice at the table around those decisions that affect them, can actually help to make change. The other call to action is invest in children as a nation building. We're hearing a lot about that from Mark Carney, right? Nation building priority. Children should be on that. Ensuring equitable resource allocation and truly implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, a fraction of which have been enacted, and in particular, Jordan's principle. Uh, Jordan's principle is it calls to have all Indigenous children get equitable access to healthcare based on Jordan River, who spent his life from birth to age 5 in a hospital with some complex medical needs, at which time he passed away. He was never able to leave hospital, not because he didn't have a family to return to, not because he didn't have the support of a community, but because they didn't have the funds necessary to maintain him. He never went home. So this is a principle that really needs to be enacted. It's been passed. It still has yet to see results. So in conclusion, this report and other recommendations that I've garnered through other bodies of services and systems I've worked with really call for 4 major policy recommendations to help, and these are all resilience building types of policies. The health system supports to invest in pediatric mental health care, strengthen immunization coverage. Did I mention that we've lost our measles eradication status in Canada? Yeah, we have. That was just announced, that who, and that really, when you think about this, that we've lost our status in measles eradication, is really something that we should be thinking about putting more into our public health system to get that status back and to keep kids healthy. Expanding nutrition programs, because we know we are food scarcity, food security, insecurity is an issue, and promoting physical activity, hard to do when you have to pay for it and you don't have the money and the schools aren't open to provide it. Rights, safety, and justice. Um, One of the things in Canada that we have signed on to, which is the UN Children Rights of the Children, we're a signatory for children's rights, but we really don't walk the talk. There are other examples in other countries where they've really embraced this, but we are behind in this. We don't elevate our youth voices to really enforce that kind of children's rights perspective. We tend to just, put on them or guess what they need. But we need to strengthen the child protection systems, regulate digital platforms, address systemic racism and reform policing practices. We need social and economic supports to expand the Canada Child Benefit, improve housing and food security, and support Indigenous-led programs, and to also in educational system supports implement a national digital literacy curriculum, address bullying, and promote mental health and equity education. Oh, that's my cue. I'm just about done. Um, Yeah, so I'm coming to the close, and I just want to end with we've looked at some of the sort of practice models for building resilience. We've looked at policy directions that we can take to and policy actions to build resilience for our youth. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research that Dean Williams had mentioned. I just haven't officially launched the Thrive Research Incubator for Child and Youth Trauma. We're setting up, we have a beautiful space at the Factor-Inwentash Faculty of Social Work, starting to bring in equipment, starting to staff it. And really what we want to do, and she's mentioned some of the goals and aims of the lab, but what we found is that we have a lot of good research around. It's a data lab, so we're going to look at analyzing data to help inform policy and practices for child and youth trauma and resilience. But we also know that there's good data out there in community agencies that never really gets analyzed. They're underfunded, they're understaffed, they don't have the research culture or infrastructure. So this lab is going to go and partner with these agencies. We already have a few on board, Boost is one of them, where we can help them mine that data that they've collected over decades to be able to take this potentially rich data source and do something with it so that we can produce training, we can produce reports, we can produce policy directives and practice programs for these kids. So on that note, I think I've reached the end, and I want to thank you very much for joining me this evening, both in person and virtually. And I hope I've left enough time now for question and answer period. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Ramona, for this such a comprehensive talk on resilience, trauma and resilience. I think not only that you provided a, very detailed review of the concepts of these terms, childhood adversities, trauma, as well as trauma informed, but I also appreciate you really gave us a very timely presentation of what's happening to children right now. And the data, the things that you show, I think this cross country check up on Canadian children makes me wonder, wow, okay, what was the children's world like? Also, thank you for highlighting the programs that you think are working. There's the things, the issue that those things that are happening, the reality of children is not great, but I think I appreciate you focus on the programs, from the small programs to also the policy recommendations. So it's like I appreciate your ability to zoom in and also zoom out, and I think really taking us to think about this at multiple levels. Um, just say hi for everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Fan. I'm one of the faculty members here at the faculty. I'm also the director for Talk About Counseling Clinic. So I'm here. I have the pleasure to be the moderator for the Q&A. So I have some questions on my own, but I don't want to take the time from the crowds because I'm pretty sure there will be probably questions and some feedback. I want to make sure that we get this opportunity to interact with Professor Alagia. So maybe I already see a hand there. It's just wondering, people in the crowd, if there's any questions and things people want to share.
I have some questions from our online audience.
Thank
So
you.
the first one is it possible for a child to build resilience themselves, even if they have minimal or non-existent positive external factors around them?
Wow, that's an easy one to start with. First of all, thank you, Lynn. Hi, Lynn. And I have to mention that Lynn is also the Factor-Inwentash chair in children's mental health. So we've done a lot of work together, teaching and sharing ideas. Thank you very much. Well, we do see those remarkable stories where, a child has really come from very little with very few supports. And they become, they grow up and they become some sort of, super athlete or super musician. But those stories are rare, and that's why we notice them. So, to answer that question, is it possible? Yes, but it's not our optimal best. Um, those maybe those kids who grow up to adults to be that we could sort of study them in as unique, but really most kids need it all. So it is possible, but we also see the downward spiral where kids who are not supported grow up as adults, and we just have to look at our jails, prison systems, uh, psychiatric units and other places to know that they didn't get what they needed. And that's not, so optimally, it's best to have all those systems in place and all those supports for resilience. But is it impossible? No, but they end up being are those remarkable stories.
I can ask another question from online. When comparing statistics in different countries, are there certain locations where trauma levels are higher for children? And if so, why is it higher in those areas?
Globally, is that good? Was that part of the, oh, yes, absolutely. They're going to be much higher, and whether it gets measured or not, because they're usually countries that may not have the resources to be able to do that, but any war-torn country, what, I can't even imagine what's happening to those kids in, let's say, the Ukraine, where the practice of the Russians is to kidnap those children and make them good Russian soldiers. Like, that's just one example. We have those examples in the Middle East. We have them in Sudan. So those where that the trauma levels are going to be much higher in those parts of the world.
Thank you so much. So thank you for actually raising that issue about Ukraine and the children in Ukraine. Uh, I've been heading a trauma therapy program for children of war with Hope Worldwide in Ukraine, and the question that I wanted to speak to you or to ask you about is, Canada is a country of immigrants, has always been. And it seems that this type of trauma has been coming to Canada for generations and generations, and yet, and we see this currently. For instance, in the situation with Ukraine, there were 300,000 Ukrainians that came over, and there might be more, but there were 300,000 that came over since 2022, and the primarily the moms who come with the children, and then they have to do what all immigrants have to do. So down through the generations, which is find housing, get a job, and deal with their issues. And so we see that integrating children, these children, in Canadian schools can be difficult. And I just kind of wonder. So not necessarily focusing on this, but I kind of wonder, in your area of social work, and you know is there should we pay more attention to that, and maybe on questionnaires ask, like, what potential trauma background are we dealing with, whether it's children of Holocaust survivors, which even is my background, or you know people coming from war-torn countries. We had Sudan, Somalia, Rwanda, and maybe the school system is not actively paying enough attention. But I don't think, this is just me, but I don't think this is necessarily the exception. If you look around this room, you know, everyone is a child of an immigrant or an immigrant themselves. So that's my question: is what you talk about trauma-informed therapy, but how are we paying enough attention to that? It's not just the exception; that it's almost the rule.
Yeah, great question. Because you've hit on so many things that I'm hoping to get across, but that's why we need trauma-informed environments everywhere. You just made the point that the ACEs study said, there are many more traumatized people than we ever knew. They just don't talk about it, or they don't disclose it, or we don't know how to define it, but we need to almost create environments as if there's a lot of trauma around. So then we're going to get to those people. So it's not personal one-on-one therapy. It's the environment that actually provides this trauma-informed perspective. It's a great example too with the schools. Teachers can't do it all, but they could be trauma-informed trained. But they need the supports of like social workers, not police officers and security guards going in. Those behaviors are exactly what you're talking about, the result of trauma that doesn't get discussed. These kids are just reverberating. So it comes out in their actions. So, I don't know what to do about this, because the trend is to reduce those kinds of mental health supports like social workers. And there's other child and youth workers and behaviors. There's all sorts of other helping professionals that could be working in the schools that have been eroded over the years, and they're not coming back. And that's what the teachers can't do it alone. And a lot of the place where we're going to see with kids where there's problems is at school. So I don't, I go back to, we need to fortify our schools in a different way, and help our teachers to identify, and then to have places to send these kids, services, which are also being eroded and funding's being cut back in. I want to try to present a good news picture, but I can't at the risk of dismissing what's really going on out there. And it's a great point. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma from many, many different sources. We all probably have our own story that we could bring to this floor. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but that's kind of but there are agencies that are dealing with this. I know there are people in the audience who are working with refugees and immigrants to support them through this. But you know, we've had other settlement houses have been cut, ESL programs, learning English. Or French, depending what part of Canada you're in, they've been cut back. So we're going in the wrong direction. We know where the right direction is.
Thank you, doctor. I'm not a social worker. I work in the court system. I'm a justice of the peace, and we make decisions around bail. I don't do sentencing or trials. That's the job of judges. And so you kind of touched on it, what you were just saying, but the reality is, there will be children who are engaged in the criminal justice system for a variety of reasons. And you're talking about trauma-informed therapy. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, well, what does trauma-informed punishment look like? Or what does trauma-informed justice system look like? And so do you yourself in your practice work with the court system? And what's been your experience with that, if that's the case?
Indirectly, when I work with the Child Advocacy Center that I've mentioned and others in the region, we're often, working with the, criminal justice system and support systems through, I know that, and in my work in intimate partner violence, and other areas of violence, I know that there are programs available to judges and lawyers, if we start at that level, to give them trauma-informed training, but most of that is voluntary, not mandatory. So the trauma that, it's whoever's interested in the court system, legal process system that will avail themselves of that. It's not mandated. So the training is there. I know that it's mandatory sometimes for new judges coming on, let's say for Kira's Law. I know that that the little girl that was on a visit with her father, where a lot of agencies said they shouldn't have been visiting. He was not well. The judge decided that dad has a right to see his child, and he, walked her off a cliff on the Niagara Escarpment in February, because that's when you go hiking with a 4-year-old. And so judges are given it's mandatory now for them to have that kind of training in trauma-informed and domestic violence for incoming judges, but not the ones who are already, grandfathered in. And they're probably the ones that need maybe more of that trauma-informed training because of some of the, attitudes that were prevailing at the time that they were being trained. So yes, the training programs are out there, but they're mostly voluntary.
I have a kind of a long-winded comment question, so I'm going to try and wrap it up shortly. But when we talk about resilience and trauma, I like the way you frame it, how resilience is not an individual, like an individual quality. It's more of a all-encompassing. I mean, it's what we learn here in social work. And we hear stories of past generations who will look at our current youth mental health crisis and make comments such as, like, oh, we lived through the Great Depression, we lived through the war, and we got through it. And I'm just reflecting on how a big part of that was probably the community that they would have had in things like religion, and the community supports that they had to build up that resiliency in them to make it more, I guess, easy to get through those traumatic events. And I would argue that now we live in the most disconnected time ever. Youth are very isolated from each other, and when they are connected, it's usually through this lens of a screen. But school, which is their biggest socializing thing, is pulling back all these supports because of what's happening at a governmental level. I'm not to say that religion is not important and it's not being practiced, but I would say it's less prevalent than it was in World War II days. And so I guess my comment or question is more so about how do we strengthen resiliency in children who are the least connected they've ever been?
Sorry, they're least connected to,
Yeah, the least connected that they've ever been.
oh, that they've ever been. I just
Yeah,
didn't get the last part.
Sorry, no worries.
Yeah, yeah. These are tough questions on a cold fall evening. Yeah, these are the questions that I hope your generation of social workers are working on, and that we're helping you to develop these kinds of answers. I think maybe a little bit of what you're saying is there more community back then, or are we romanticizing what was happening back then? I think there were problems back then too. And you know, I was in an active practice up until recently, seeing families with young people who are having maybe stuck, you know, what we call failure to launch or whatever. And they would sometimes bring that up. Well, in my day, you know, and sometimes they're overlooking that they didn't get what they needed and they could have done better. And sometimes I just said, so how's that working for you? Because they're bringing in a whole host of problems, not just their kid who's not. Because sometimes it's funny how the memory works. Like we romanticize the past and we sort of, you know, obliterate the stuff that wasn't working. Because sometimes you'll say that they went through a whole bunch of adversity and they wish they'd had support. So, oh, you know, my dad used to break that broom handle over my back when he's mad, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's really, it's not an answer I can give globally because each situation is different. But if the nub of your question is, have we lost some sort of community and connectedness that was working, then we need to bring it back. And we need to find these ways to bring it back. So one way is, if the online community is a toxic, harmful community for kids, then, and the antidote is to get regulation on these social media platforms that let these kids get on and doesn't matter and there's no censoring, then that's the work that we have to do to get that regulation in place. I'm looking at what happened with the, you know, speed camera bans. You know, how safe is that making traffic, you know, for kids around schools? And there was a great grassroots movement that started with parents to oppose it. There was a mayor's movement, you know, in different cities in Ontario to say to make sure that until something else was around to have those speed cameras. So we do need to rebuild that community. We're in a rebuilding phase in general, reconnecting and bringing those communities back in different ways and with advocacy. So you got your work cut out for you. I'm counting on you.
Um, If I can just add a little bit on that, I do think, yes, online, we know there's a lot of harm associated with online environment, but there's obviously also benefits in this one. Like, it also allows people to stay connected. I've seen various youth-led initiatives and whatnot where they create community to promote that resilience and support among one another. So I think it's possible. It's just with different generations and technologies and advancement at different times, it varies and change, but I think the spirits of having that community for each other is there. It is harder to sort of think after COVID because we just had such a weird time, but I just want to highlight that. Also, just taking, I know we're coming to the end, but I want to quickly, I think, respond, also thinking about the question about trauma-informed punishment. I think one of our colleagues, Professor Michael Saney. He works, I believe he and some people at the OAC did applied psychology program. They actually have a pilot study working with family courts in Ontario, talking about trauma informed. I happened to hear some of that in some conversations. So I think there's some work that has been happening, and hopefully this trauma informed is not only, oh, when it comes to trauma, let's talk to social worker and mental health people. It is really the environment. So hopefully we're not just preaching to the choir, but also really expanding the knowledge that it's an environment we want to be. It's the school, it's the community centers, it's the healthcare systems and whatnot where the children are in really the environments where children are embedded. They can all start to think about what that school look like for them rather than just social work alone. So on that note, I think our dean is ready to.
Well, thanks to you both. I just think that this was an excellent, excellent talk. And I want to thank you, Dr. Lagia, for bringing us your insights, but also getting us thinking. I can see everybody's thinking about how this affects us, how this affects generations after us. And I want to say that part of what I really appreciated about your talk is that there was candor. You're not like what's the word? Soft peddling. You're not soft peddling it, but there's still hope. And you know, the attention to programs that are out there, the ways that if we're aware of what's going on, that maybe we can be intervening, the conversations we could be having with young people, the roles that we might have as people that are in the lives of other young people. I think there's a lot of hope there too. So thank you so much for that. Please join me in thanking her for that wonderful, wonderful. I also want to thank Professor Lin Fang for moderating the discussion and adding her own thoughts, so thank you. And I'll once again thank Janis Rotman for her generous support of our faculty and her role in making these talks possible. So lastly, I will thank you, our audience, for joining us here tonight, also the people online. I hope you'll join us again for future talks. We have the space here until 8 o'clock, so please take your time if you'd like to mix and mingle some more until then, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Good night.